The road outside the small workshop was quieter than usual, the hum of the evening traffic fading into the background as the last few vehicles made their way home. Karim had just finished locking up, the heavy metal door rattling shut behind him. He rolled his shoulders, loosening the ache that had built up over the long shift, and adjusted the strap of his bag. The air carried a faint trace of machine oil from the garage, mingling with the smell of damp concrete and dust. A thin breeze moved through the street, brushing against his jacket and shifting a few scraps of paper along the gutter. He was halfway to the curb when he saw it. A dog, alone, standing dead still in the middle of the lane about 15 meters ahead. The first thing he noticed was its posture. It wasn't moving toward anything. It wasn't sniffing the ground, pacing, or showing the restless curiosity strays usually had. It was standing with its legs stiff, head low, and eyes fixed in a way that made Karim pause mid-step. It wasn't the usual wariness of a street animal keeping its distance. It was a kind of focus that seemed locked onto something unseen. The dog's coat was patchy, a mix of faded beige and white dulled by dust. Even from this distance, Karim could see the uneven rise of its ribs with each breath. Its tail hung straight down, still and heavy, the tip brushing the rough tarmac. A motorbike approached from the far end of the road, the rider slowing just enough to swerve around the animal before continuing on. The dog didn't flinch or step aside. Its head followed the movement of the bike for the briefest moment before returning to the same forward focus. Karim stayed where he was, one foot still on the curb, the other on the road. He'd seen stray dogs every day in the city, some alone, others in small packs, but they rarely stayed in one place when people or vehicles came close. This one was different. It wasn't frozen in fear. It wasn't scrounging for food. It was as if it had rooted itself there, unmoving, waiting for something. He took a step forward, slow and steady. The sound of his boots on the road was muted by the faint hiss of the breeze. The dog's ears twitched once, a small flicker of motion, but its body didn't shift. Its gaze followed him now, the eyes dark and still, without any sign of aggression. It was watchfulness, a quiet, unbroken attention that seemed almost deliberate. When he was close enough to be sure it could hear him, Karim let his voice out low and even, not loud enough to startle. "Easy," he murmured, the tone more for reassurance than meaning. The word seemed to register. The dog's head lifted a fraction, its front paws adjusting their weight almost imperceptibly. A faint tremor passed through its flanks, not the sharp kind of a startled shake, but the subtle, constant quiver of strain. The street was narrow here, lined with closed shop fronts. The rolling shutters reflected the dull orange of the nearest streetlight, which flickered at irregular intervals. Somewhere behind him, the metallic clink of a chain from the workshop door carried in the air, and from further down, the hollow rattle of a scooter bounced between the walls. Still, the dog's posture stayed the same. Feet planted, shoulders forward, chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. Karim's eyes scanned the surrounding area, half expecting to see another dog nearby, perhaps injured or hiding, but the road was empty. If this one was waiting for something, it wasn't obvious what. The risk, though, was plain. In this position, it could be struck by any passing vehicle. Even moving a short distance to the wrong side of the road could mean a collision. If it stayed too long without food or water, its thin frame suggested it didn't have much reserve. And if it bolted blindly, startled by noise, the speed of oncoming traffic wouldn't give it a second chance. He adjusted his bag on his shoulder and took another step forward, careful to keep his movements unhurried. The dog's nose lifted slightly now, nostrils flaring as if catching a trace of his scent. The eyes stayed fixed on him, but he noticed the smallest tilt of its head, the muscles along its back tightening for a moment. This was a dog on the edge of a decision: to retreat, to hold ground, or to act in some other way entirely. For a few seconds they stood like that, a few meters apart, neither one pushing closer. Karim felt that strange pull again, the unspoken sense that this wasn't a chance meeting. Stray dogs sometimes followed people for scraps of food, but this one wasn't closing the distance or circling in hope. It was watching, assessing, waiting. The wind shifted slightly, bringing with it the faint, acrid scent of exhaust from a passing truck at the far end of the road. A strip of discarded cardboard scraped against the pavement somewhere behind him, and a faint metallic clatter echoed from a nearby alley. The dog didn't turn its head toward any of it. Every ounce of its attention was on him. Karim glanced once more along the road. No traffic was coming yet, but he knew it wouldn't stay clear for long. "It's okay," he said again, softer this time, the sound almost lost in the wind. The dog blinked, slow and deliberate as though weighing something unseen. Then it lifted one front paw, held it suspended for a moment, and placed it down soundlessly, shifting its stance forward by the smallest degree. It wasn't advancing to greet him. It wasn't backing away either. It was a subtle movement, but it was enough to suggest readiness. Readiness to move, but not away from him. The stillness that followed wasn't the brittle kind born of fear. It was watchful, measured, and strangely deliberate. Karim didn't know yet what had brought the dog here or why it stood like this, but he knew with certainty that it wasn't going to walk off into the night without him knowing why. And in that stretch of quiet between them, with the dim streetlight flickering overhead and the road lying empty around them, the sense of something unspoken settled heavily in the air. The dog's posture, its eyes, its refusal to move, all of it said that whatever was about to happen next would not happen without his part in it. Karim had been about to turn away, thinking he had given the dog enough of his attention for one evening. The standoff between them had lasted several minutes, neither side making a decisive move, and it seemed best to leave the animal to its own choices. He shifted his weight, one shoulder angling toward the pavement behind him, and took half a step in the opposite direction. That was when it happened. Sudden, deliberate movement breaking the stillness. The dog closed the short distance between them in 2 quick steps. There was no bark, no growl, no warning sound at all. Its mouth closed on the hem of his shirt, the fabric pinched between its teeth with a firmness that startled him into stillness. It wasn't enough to hurt, but there was strength in the grip, a weight that pulled faintly against him. Karim looked down, meeting the animal's gaze from less than a meter away. The eyes were dark, alert, and unblinking. The jaws held steady, not clamping harder but not letting go either. There was nothing playful about it. No darting of the head, no lightness in its movement. Its ears were angled slightly back, the way dogs sometimes hold them when they're uncertain but resolved to act. Karim could feel the warmth of its breath against his side, fast and shallow. Every part of its stance said the same thing. It did not want him to leave. He remained still, his arms loose at his sides. Any sudden motion might spook the animal into tightening its grip or bolting into the road. The air was quiet except for the faint hum of an electrical box mounted to a nearby wall and the distant whoosh of a vehicle passing at the far end of the street. The dog's legs trembled faintly under its thin frame. The muscles in its shoulders taut as if ready to pull or hold its ground. Karim let his voice out low, careful not to shift the balance of the moment. "Easy," he murmured. The ears flicked in response, but the dog didn't release him. He could see now that its mouth was set just firmly enough to keep hold without tearing the fabric. This was controlled, intentional. The possibilities formed quickly in his mind, stripped of sentiment and kept to the facts. If the dog was trying to stop him, it meant there was a specific reason, and with animals in this area those reasons often came down to 2, danger or need. Either the dog was trying to prevent him from walking into harm, or it was asking him, in its own way, to follow. Both possibilities carried urgency. If there was a threat nearby, it could be moving closer. If there was another animal in trouble, minutes might matter. The grip shifted slightly as the dog stepped back once, tugging gently at his shirt. It was not a frantic pull. It was measured, as though testing whether he would match the movement. Karim kept his stance relaxed and allowed the slight pull to draw him forward a half step. The dog responded immediately, taking 2 more backward steps, then pausing, its eyes still on him. The tail remained low, but the stiff stillness from earlier had changed into something more directed. Even at this distance, he could see the strain in the animal's frame. Its ribs pressed sharply against the skin with each breath, and a faint line of dust traced the ridge along its spine. The hind legs were angled to bear weight efficiently, but the front paws landed with more care now, the pads pressing down quietly against the rough surface of the road. Whatever was driving it to do this was strong enough to override any hesitation it might have had toward approaching a stranger. Karim adjusted the strap of his bag, letting it rest more securely against his back, freeing his movements in case he needed to react quickly. The dog's jaw loosened for a moment but didn't let go completely, holding him as though it feared he would vanish if the connection broke. It gave another pull, this time a fraction stronger, and angled its body toward a narrow street branching off to the right. He considered the stakes again in plain terms. If he ignored this and turned away, the most immediate risk was to the dog itself, standing in the road, exposed to oncoming traffic or other hazards. But if the dog's behavior was linked to something else, the consequences could extend beyond one life. A trapped animal could die from exposure or injury if left unassisted. A sick one might not survive the night without intervention. He didn't need to guess exactly what lay ahead to know that leaving carried more weight than following. The dog stepped back again, gave another short tug to his shirt, then released him completely and turned away. It took 3 quick paces down the side street, then stopped and looked over its shoulder. The message in its body language was unambiguous. The tension in its frame, the backward flick of the ears, and the directness of its gaze. Karim felt the decision solidify. He stepped forward, matching its direction. The dog's head turned toward the alley and it moved again, slower this time, as if adjusting its pace to his. Its tail remained low, swaying faintly with the motion of walking but without the loose rhythm of ease. The air in the side street was cooler, the taller buildings blocking the last of the day's heat. A faint scent of damp stone rose from the ground, mixed with something else. Faint but organic and not quite right. The sound of their steps echoed more in the enclosed space. Karim kept a steady pace, letting the dog stay ahead but close enough that its signals remained clear. It glanced back twice in the first 10 meters, the checks brief but deliberate. The urgency hadn't faded. If anything, it was sharpening, compressed into each look and pause. The stakes followed him with every step. If this was a misreading, he would lose nothing but time. If it wasn't, if there was an animal in need at the other end of this, then every minute they spent could be the difference between finding it alive or too late. They reached the midpoint of the lane, where the cracked pavement dipped slightly. The dog slowed, ears angling forward toward something unseen. Karim stopped with it, scanning the dim stretch ahead, but the animal didn't linger long. It pressed on, picking its way with more intent now, paws landing carefully on the uneven ground. The pace told him they were close to whatever had brought him here. Karim's awareness of the risks settled into something more concrete. The dog's decision to approach, to make physical contact, to insist, all of it spoke to an urgency rooted in real-world stakes, not chance behavior. And now, as they moved deeper into the quiet, shadowed street, he knew that whatever lay ahead would explain why a stray had refused to let him walk away. The fabric slipped from between the dog's teeth without a sound, released as cleanly as it had been taken. It did not linger in place. Instead, it moved forward in quick, deliberate strides, its paws striking the ground with a soft, steady rhythm. 3 steps ahead, it paused and turned its head sharply over one shoulder, eyes fixing on Karim as if to measure the gap between them. Its tail hung low, swaying only faintly with the motion of its walk, and each backward flick of its ears seemed to carry the same silent instruction. follow. Karim stepped after it, matching the pace without closing the distance too quickly. The dog turned forward again and resumed moving, its gait fluid but cautious. Every few meters it glanced back, each check as brief as it was precise. The movement spoke of an urgency that was controlled rather than frantic, as though the animal knew that rushing could lose him, but slowing too much could cost them both time. The air was cooler now, funneled through the narrow buildings on either side, carrying faint traces of damp brick and rusted metal. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed, the sound muted and hollow in the enclosed space. The dog's path was not straight. It skirted around a broken section of pavement, avoided a pile of discarded timber, and veered slightly toward the right side of the alley. Karim kept his attention on the animal's posture, the tension in its spine, the way its head angled slightly forward, and the quick set of its breathing. These were not the movements of a dog merely wandering. They were directional, precise, and meant for him to follow. If he fell too far behind, the connection between them could break, and with it, the chance to see what had driven the dog to find him in the first place. They reached a junction where the alley narrowed further, hemmed in by walls that bore the marks of weather and neglect. The dog slowed here, lowering its head briefly to sniff the ground before lifting it again. The tail remained low, but the set of the ears, turning and tilting with each small sound, showed it was listening as much as it was leading. Karim understood the stakes in simple terms. If the dog was guiding him to another animal, then time was pressing. An injury could worsen by the minute, and exposure to the night air would sap what little strength an injured or trapped creature had left. If it was danger the dog wanted him to avoid, then it was already close. The animal moved again, slipping through a narrow gap where two buildings leaned toward each other. The ground here was uneven, littered with old leaves that clung damply to the stone. It quickened its pace for several steps before stopping to glance back once more. Karim met its eyes, gave a small nod, and closed the distance slightly. The dog turned forward and carried on, the urgency in its stride undiminished. As they advanced deeper into the lane, the city's distant hum grew fainter. The quiet was interrupted only by the sound of the dog's paws pressing against the grit underfoot and the occasional creak of settling wood from the buildings above. Karim noticed now that the dog's breathing was not from exertion alone. There was a tension in it, a quick, shallow rhythm that hinted at both wariness and resolve. Each backward glance seemed to hold the same question. Was he still there? And would he keep coming? Another turn brought them into a smaller, darker passageway. Here the walls closed in enough that Karim could reach both sides if he stretched his arms. The air was cooler still, carrying a faint musty smell that suggested standing water nearby. The dog slowed again, sniffed the ground, then resumed its path. Each time it looked back there was no hesitation in continuing forward once it saw him. The pattern repeated: lead, check, move on, a rhythm shaped by instinct and urgency. The stakes stayed clear in Karim's mind. Every forward step was one closer to whatever had sparked this behavior, but also one more minute lost if the outcome proved critical. Injuries could be fatal if untreated. Traps, even shallow ones, could mean exhaustion, shock, or worse. The dog's choice to lead him here had already altered the course of the night. It was his task now to keep that course unbroken. When the passage finally widened, the dog broke into a quicker trot, covering a few meters before stopping again, its head turning sharply to ensure he followed. Karim kept moving, steady but committed, the distance between them holding constant. The dog's tail flicked once, low but more deliberate than before, and then it pressed on toward the next turn, the flicker of fear and determination still written plainly in every movement of its body. The dog's pace slowed as the alley narrowed, the walls on either side drawing closer until the space felt almost closed in. The light thinned here, broken into uneven strips by the overhangs of old buildings leaning toward each other. Karim matched the dog's movements, stepping carefully over loose stones and fragments of wood scattered across the ground. The air carried a faint, stale dampness, the kind that lingered where sunlight rarely reached. A few meters ahead, the dog stopped abruptly, its body tense. Ears pricked forward toward a shadowed corner where an old wooden crate sat crooked against the wall. At first, there was nothing but the soft, uneven sound of the dog's breathing. Then, through the stillness, Karim heard it. A faint, muffled whimper. It came in uneven intervals, almost swallowed by the quiet, but distinct enough to hold him in place. The sound wasn't sharp or panicked, but low and drawn, as if each one cost the animal, making it more energy than it had to spare. The dog in front of him stepped closer to the crate, lowering its head and sniffing at the edges, then glanced back at him with a quick, insistent look before returning its attention to the source of the sound. Karim moved forward slowly, his steps deliberate on the uneven surface. The crate was weathered, its wood swollen and darkened from years of exposure. One corner rested on a pile of broken bricks, leaving a narrow gap between the base and the ground. As he crouched, the noise came again, clearer now. The whimper was coming from somewhere beneath the crate, lower than ground level. He set a hand on the wood and pressed lightly, testing its weight. It shifted a fraction, scraping against the wall, and the whimper rose sharply for a moment before settling back into its strained rhythm. He leaned closer to the gap, peering into the shadow below. The faint scent of earth and rust reached him, mixed with something warmer. Organic, the unmistakable smell of an animal's body pressed into a confined space. It was too dark to see clearly, but the sound told him enough. Something was down there, trapped. The narrowness of the opening suggested it had fallen into a space between structures or perhaps into an old storage recess half buried over time. Either way, it wasn't somewhere an animal could escape from unaided. The dog stood to his side now, head lowered, its gaze fixed on the crate. Its ears flicked back at each movement Karim made, but it didn't retreat. Every line of its body showed anticipation, as though bracing for the next action. The stakes were clear and immediate. If the animal beneath was injured, it could deteriorate quickly in such a confined, damp space. Even without injury, exhaustion and dehydration could set in within hours. The muffled quality of the cry meant it was either deep in the recess or lying in a position where its chest was partially pressed against the ground, restricting its voice. Karim shifted his position, bracing one foot against the uneven stones and placing both hands on the edge of the crate. The wood was heavier than it looked, the dampness having swollen it solid, but it gave slightly when he leaned into the pressure. He didn't force it too quickly. Sudden noise or movement could cause further distress to the animal below. The dog beside him paced once in a tight circle, then settled back into a low stance, watching. The cry came again, thinner now, followed by a faint scrape, as though claws were dragging against stone. It was the sound of an animal trying to shift in place without success. Karim kept his movement steady, sliding the crate just enough to widen the gap by a few more centimeters. The scent from below was stronger now, edged with the dry, warm note of an animal that had been still for too long. He crouched lower, angling himself to see more clearly into the dark space beneath. There, just beyond the edge of the light, he caught the faintest glimpse of movement, a small, trembling shape pressed against the far wall of the recess. Its outline was uneven, one side shifting slightly as if favoring a limb. The soft whimper came again, and this time it carried a raw edge of fatigue. The dog beside him let out a single, low breath, almost a sigh, and shifted its paws in place. Karim straightened slightly, scanning the space to see how best to reach in without causing harm. The opening was still too narrow for safe access, but it was enough to confirm the urgency. The animal below could not climb out on its own, and its condition was likely to worsen the longer it remained there. The risks were plain. Without intervention, it could succumb to cold, injury, or the simple depletion of its strength. He placed one hand on the crate again, readying to move it further, knowing that each motion now needed to be precise. and that whatever lay ahead, he would need to act before the fading cries fell silent. The crate shifted with a deep scrape as Karim leaned his weight into it, the damp wood resisting before finally giving way. He eased it aside just far enough to reveal the space beneath. Where the ground should have been level, a section of worn wooden boards had rotted through, leaving a jagged opening no wider than the span of a man's shoulders. Below, the hole was shallow but uneven, the earth and broken planks forming a small pit. In its center lay the source of the cries. A puppy, curled tightly into itself, trembling in the dim light. Its coat was thin and mottled, the pale patches dulled with dirt. One front paw jutted forward at an awkward angle, caught between two splintered boards. The animal lifted its head at the shift of light, its eyes wide, ears flattened against its skull. The sound it made now was softer than before, a low, uncertain whine that faded quickly as if even that effort took more than it could give. Its sides rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths, and the trapped paw twitched once before going still again. Karim crouched low, resting one hand lightly on the edge of the opening. The jagged boards framed the hole like broken teeth, the splinters angled in a way that could tear the pup's skin if it tried to pull free without help. Beside him, the older dog hovered close, its body angled toward the hole, nose dipping toward the trapped pup before retreating again. Its tail was still low, the tip barely moving. Every part of its posture was tense but quiet, the kind of stillness that came from long focus rather than fear. Karim knew the risks clearly now. The pup was pinned, unable to escape on its own, and any attempt to struggle could worsen the injury. Remaining in the hole meant prolonged pressure on the limb, cutting off circulation and risking permanent damage. Exposure to the cold, damp air would drain its energy quickly, and without water or food, the hours ahead would be unforgiving. Karim studied the boards, gauging where they might give without collapsing further into the hole. The gap was too narrow for him to climb in, but wide enough that, with care, he could reach the paw. He slid one hand slowly into the space, palm open, fingers spread to avoid pressing too hard against the splinters. The pup flinched at the movement, pulling its head back until it touched the far wall of the pit. Karim paused, letting his presence settle, his hand still in the air just short of contact. The older dog leaned forward once more, emitting a short, low breath through its nose. And the pup's gaze flicked toward it before returning to Karim's hand. He took that moment to move, wrapping his fingers gently around the thin limb. The trapped paw was warm but tense, the pads pressed against the sharp edge of the wood. With slow, steady pressure, he eased the plank outward just enough to create space, then guided the paw free from its wedge. The release was immediate but cautious. He kept hold long enough to prevent the pup from scrambling too quickly and cutting itself on the remaining splinters. Once the paw was clear, the pup shifted its weight, testing the limb with a small movement. It didn't cry out, but the leg folded back quickly, kept close to its body. Karim slid both hands into the hole now, cradling the animal's narrow frame as he lifted it up and over the edge. The pup was light in his grip, its heartbeat rapid against his palm. It tucked itself inward, head pressed under his arm, trembling in short bursts that rippled through its body. The older dog stepped closer, its nose brushing briefly against the pup's side before it stepped back again, giving space without moving far. Karim rose carefully to his feet, keeping the pup steady, aware that its survival depended now on warmth, rest, and the absence of further strain to the injured limb. The danger of entrapment was past, but the risk of shock and injury remained, and every minute from here would matter. Karim kept his grip steady on the struggling limb, his fingers holding just firmly enough to prevent another slip between the splintered boards. The wood was rough against his skin, damp and swollen in places and sharp in others where age had worn it to jagged edges. He shifted his other hand beneath the puppy's chest, feeling the shallow rise and fall of its ribs against his palm. Its breathing was quick, the tiny muscles working in rapid bursts that told him it was both frightened and exhausted. A faint tremor ran through its body, not from cold alone, but from the strain of being held in one position for so long. He eased the paw free from the narrow wedge, the motion slow and unbroken, each centimeter gained without the sudden jolt that could startle it back into panic. The release came with a soft sound from the puppy, not quite a whimper, more a breath that carried relief and uncertainty together. He kept his hands in place for a moment longer, making sure the freed limbs stayed clear of the boards. The risk was still there. A sudden kick or twist could reopen the trap. Once certain it was safe, he slid his supporting hand further beneath the pup's small frame, lifting it gently until the weight shifted fully into his palms. The animal was lighter than he expected, its body narrow and fragile beneath the thin covering of fur. He straightened slowly, mindful not to jostle the paw that had been pinned. The puppy tucked its head inward, pressing against the warmth of his arm. Karim adjusted his hold so that the injured limb rested without bearing weight, supported entirely by his hand. The animal trembled in small, uneven waves, the kind that ripple through a body when the tension of survival has not yet left it. He could feel the faint beat of its heart against his wrist, rapid but steady enough to reassure him that, for now, it was holding on. A step away, the older dog, likely the mother, watched in silence. Her stance was low but not rigid, the weight balanced evenly across her paws. Her ears were angled forward, eyes fixed on every movement he made. There was no bark, no growl, no pacing. She stayed in place, close enough to intervene if she felt the need, but still allowing him to work. Her breath rose in slow, controlled rhythms, the chest expanding and settling as if she was matching his own measured pace. Karim spoke softly, the tone more important than the words. "It's okay, girl." The sound seemed to ripple between them, the mother's tail lowering further before giving a single, brief motion. Not loose, not playful, but acknowledging. She stepped once toward him, then stopped, holding her position as he shifted the puppy securely into the crook of his arm. He knew the risks weren't over. A trapped limb could suffer bruising or circulation loss, and the shock of confinement could linger long after release. The pup's body heat was faint against his hand, suggesting it had been down there for hours, maybe longer, without warmth. If left alone now, even freed, it might not survive the night. It would need shelter, rest, and water before its body could fully recover from the strain. The mother moved closer as he adjusted his stance, her nose lifting toward the pup but not touching yet. She held still, eyes flicking briefly to his face before returning to the small bundle in his arms. The silence between them felt deliberate, as if each was allowing the other space to act. Karim took a slow step toward a clearer patch of ground, away from the jagged boards and damp edges of the hole, his arms still wrapped around the pup's trembling form. The mother followed, her paws placing each step with quiet precision. There was no urgency now in her pace, only focus. The air in the narrow alley seemed less heavy, though the faint scent of damp earth still clung to them. Karim stopped, kneeling slightly to let the pup shift against his arm. The mother's nose touched the pup's side then, briefly and carefully as though confirming what her eyes had already told her. He stayed like that for a moment, the animal's fragile weight resting fully in his hands, the mother's gaze never breaking from them. The hole behind them was silent now, only the scattered debris marking where the danger had been. The rescue was done, but the work of survival had only begun. The quiet held, broken only by the faint sound of the pup's breath against his jacket, steady now, but still fragile enough to remind him that every choice from here would matter. Karim stepped carefully over the uneven ground, keeping the puppy close against his chest so its injured paw rested without strain. The air shifted as he moved out from the narrow alley, the faint coolness replaced by a softer, open breeze. Here, the space widened into a small clearing between the buildings where light reached more evenly, warming the stone and scattering across the patches of bare earth. The mother dog followed close at his side, her steps measured, her gaze fixed on the bundle in his arms. Her breathing was steady now, not the quick bursts of earlier, but slow, deliberate draws that matched the rhythm of her watchfulness. He paused once he reached the center of the open space, lowering himself into a crouch so the puppy could be closer to the ground without feeling the sudden shift of being placed down. The mother moved in immediately, her nose touching lightly against the pup's head in a series of brief presses. A low, soft sound escaped her, almost a hum in its steadiness, carrying no urgency but layered with recognition. The pup responded with a faint movement, its head tilting toward her warmth, though it remained curled into the shelter of Kareem's hand. For the first time since he had seen her, the mother's tail gave a slow, cautious wag. Not a broad sweep, but a measured motion, the tip moving in short arcs before stilling again. She stayed close, circling once with careful steps before returning to nudge the pup's side. Kareem remained still, giving her the space to make each approach on her terms. The open space carried no immediate threat, but the stakes were still present. The pup's injury, though no longer trapped, could limit its movement for days, and its thin frame told him it had little reserve against cold or hunger. The mother shifted her position so that her body partially blocked the breeze, a natural shield between the pup and the open air. Her ears twitched at small sounds from the street beyond. The distant clatter of a cart, the uneven footfall of someone passing, but her focus never fully left the pup. Kareem's hands adjusted slightly to let the pup's head rest against his palm while still supporting its body. The tremors that had run through it earlier were less constant now, coming only in short bursts as it shifted its weight. He glanced at the mother, noting the way her posture had changed. The tight line of her spine had eased, her head lowering into a more relaxed angle. It was not full trust, but it was no longer guarded suspicion. The quiet exchange between her and the pup continued, small touches of nose to fur, the brief brush of her cheek against its side. Each movement reinforced that the pup's survival depended on more than just freeing it from the hole. It would rely on the continued care of the one who had brought Kareem here in the first place. He set his other hand briefly on the ground beside him, steadying himself before adjusting his hold to make it easier for the mother to reach the pup fully. She stepped closer, her breath warm against his arm, then leaned in to rest her chin for a moment on the pup's back. The sound she made was even softer now, almost lost to the open air. Kareem remained silent, letting the moment settle into the stillness around them. The risk had shifted from immediate rescue to ensuring the pup could recover without further harm. In the open space, they had distance from the hazard of the broken boards, but food, shelter, and safety were still questions that needed answers. For now, though, the mother's steady presence was the strongest assurance the pup could have. The last of the tension in Kareem's shoulders eased as he let the pair remain close, the evening light catching in the quiet movement of her tail as it gave one more slow, deliberate wag. Kareem stayed crouched for a few moments longer, giving the mother and pup time to remain pressed close in the warmth of their reunion. The mother's nose moved slowly along the pup's side, pausing at the injured paw before returning to the crown of its head. The pup shifted faintly in his hand, the tremor in its body now softer, as though the steady rhythm of her presence was easing the strain that had held it tight. Kareem let the weight of the moment settle before shifting his grip and lowering the pup fully into her care. She stepped forward to take it, her body curving protectively as the pup leaned into her chest, finding balance against the steady line of her legs. He rose slowly, mindful not to disturb them. The open space felt calmer now, though the risks he had been measuring since the alley were still there. The injury to the paw would need time and rest. Without it, the pup could lose the ability to move without pain. The coming night carried its own dangers, dropping temperatures, the chance of other animals, and the simple fact that food and water would not come easily. Yet, as he stepped back, he could see that the strongest safeguard the pup had was already beside it. The mother's presence was constant, her attention split between the pup and the path ahead. She nudged the pup once, a small motion that encouraged it forward. It took a few uneven steps before leaning into her again. Kareem watched the adjustment in her pace, a slight shortening of her stride so the pup could keep up without strain. She didn't look back at him, but her path angled away from the alley, toward the quieter stretch of street where shadows were longer and foot traffic was rare. Kareem followed them with his eyes until they reached the far edge of the clearing. The sound of their steps faded against the muted hum of the street beyond, replaced by the occasional whisper of a breeze through the narrow space between buildings. The pup stayed close to her side, its head occasionally brushing her shoulder as they moved. The slow, measured way she led told him she had no plan to leave it behind. Not tonight, not while it still leaned on her for balance. He stayed in place, the faint scent of damp wood from the alley still on his hands, the image of the trapped paw fresh in his mind. This had been her doing as much as his. The decision to seek him out, the insistence that he follow, and the quiet urgency that had carried them both to the crate. Without it, the pup would still be in the dark, pinned and calling into the empty air. As the pair reached the curve of the street and their shapes thinned into the distance, Kareem finally turned away. The air had cooled further, carrying the dry rustle of leaves along the gutter. Somewhere beyond sight, the mother and pup would find their shelter for the night, each step taking them farther from the risk they had left behind. The clearing was empty now, but the quiet it held was shaped by their absence, a lingering proof of how instinct and courage met with the smallest measure of human patience could shift the course of survival.